Last night, the skies over Ukraine lit up once again, not with fireworks, but with fire and destruction. In one of the most intense assaults since the beginning of the war, Russia launched a massive overnight barrage across multiple Ukrainian cities. From Kyiv to Lviv, from Kharkiv to Odessa, sirens screamed through the darkness as missiles and drones rained down. Civilians rushed to shelters, power grids failed, and the night turned into chaos. But what triggered this new wave of escalation, and what does it mean for the future of this war? Let's break down what really happened. The new escalation began just before midnight. Ukrainian officials reported that waves of cruise missiles and Iranian-made Shahd drones were launched from Russian territory, the Black Sea, and even from occupied Crimea. The attacks came in several phases, a tactic Russia has used repeatedly to overwhelm Ukraine's air defense systems. The first wave of drones was designed to draw out anti-air systems, and then the real strikes followed, ballistic missiles aimed at critical infrastructure, energy facilities, and military targets. By dawn, explosions were reported in at least 10 regions of Ukraine. Kyiv experienced one of the heaviest bombardments in months. Witnesses described the sky glowing orange as air defense systems fired non-stop for nearly 45 minutes. The Ukrainian Air Force later announced that it had intercepted more than 70% of incoming threats, but several missiles still broke through, hitting power stations, rail hubs, and industrial areas. In Kharkiv, the situation was equally dire. The city, located just 40 kilometers from the Russian border, was struck by multiple S-300 missiles. Entire neighborhoods lost power, water, and communication overnight. Emergency services worked through the night to rescue people trapped under rubble. One residential building collapsed after being hit directly, leaving several dead and dozens injured. Lviv, far to the west and usually considered one of Ukraine's safer regions, was also targeted. This marks a worrying development: Russia's willingness to expand the range of its attacks deep into Ukrainian territory. Analysts believe that these strikes are part of a new Russian strategy to cripple Ukraine's logistics network before winter sets in. The goal appears to be simple: to make life unbearable, to pressure the government, and to exhaust the population. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the attacks as terror against civilians and vowed retaliation. In a late-night message, he said, "They think they can break us with darkness, but Ukraine will never bow to fear. Every strike only makes us stronger." But the question remains, why now? What is pushing Russia to escalate again? According to military analysts, several key factors may explain this new wave. First, the war has reached a grinding stalemate. Both sides are struggling to make significant territorial gains. Russia's forces are facing logistical problems, manpower shortages, and growing domestic criticism. By launching massive airstrikes, Moscow might be trying to project strength, to remind both Ukraine and the West that it still holds escalation dominance. Second, intelligence reports suggest that Ukraine's counteroffensive operations in the south, particularly near Tokmak and Melitopol, have put Russian supply lines under serious pressure. Striking Ukraine's energy and transportation systems could be Russia's way of retaliating and slowing down these advances. Third, winter is approaching, and with it, the renewed battle for energy. Russia has repeatedly targeted Ukraine's power grid in previous winters, aiming to plunge cities into cold and darkness. This new round of strikes fits that familiar pattern, signaling that Moscow intends to repeat its energy warfare strategy once again. For civilians, the impact is devastating. In Kyiv, subway stations once again turned into bomb shelters. Families huddled underground with blankets, candles, and flashlights. Many had already lived through similar nights before, but this one felt different. Explosions were closer, louder, more persistent. Oksandra, a 26-year-old resident of Kyiv, told local media, "We thought it was over, that it couldn't get worse, but it's like living in a nightmare that never ends." The sound of drones, it's something you never forget. Power outages hit several major cities simultaneously. Ukrainian energy company Ukrenergo confirmed widespread damage to transmission lines. Repair crews worked around the clock, even as new waves of attacks continued. Hospitals switched backup generators. In some areas, water pumping stations went offline, leaving thousands without clean water. Meanwhile, on the international stage, condemnation poured in. The United Nations described the strikes as a blatant violation of international humanitarian law. The European Union pledged emergency aid, including additional air defense systems and humanitarian supplies. The United States reiterated its commitment to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. However, behind the diplomatic language, a new tension is emerging. Western intelligence sources believe Russia might be preparing for a prolonged phase of attrition warfare, a strategy aimed not at quick victory, but at gradually wearing Ukraine and its allies down. The overnight strikes may be the opening act of this long campaign. Russian officials, on the other hand, claimed the operation was a retaliatory measure in response to recent Ukrainian drone attacks on Russian oil depots and airfields. The Kremlin accused Kyiv of terrorism and justified its own actions as defensive. State media in Russia portrayed the strikes as successful, showing footage of missiles being launched with captions describing them as precision operations, yet independent verification paints a different picture. Satellite imagery released this morning shows widespread damage across Ukrainian urban centers, with civilian infrastructure once again bearing the brunt. Apartment blocks, shopping centers, and even schools were among the targets hit. The psychological toll of such attacks is immense. In cities like Dnipro and Mykolaiv, the constant fear of night raids has forced many residents to move to rural areas. Others are living with anxiety, insomnia, and trauma. Psychologists describe it as a collective exhaustion, a state where people are both numb and terrified at the same time. Military experts warn that this new escalation might not be temporary. Russia has been stockpiling missiles and receiving fresh drone supplies from Iran and possibly North Korea. With production lines running at full capacity, Moscow now appears ready to sustain long-term aerial operations. Ukrainian defense officials have expressed concerns that the intensity of these strikes could increase in the coming weeks. On the ground, Ukraine's air defense network is under immense pressure. Western-supplied systems like Patriot and NASAMS have proven effective but limited in number. With each new barrage, Ukraine is forced to expend valuable interceptor missiles that are difficult and expensive to replace. This imbalance gives Russia a strategic advantage. It can afford to keep launching, while Ukraine must constantly conserve. In Washington, discussions are already underway about providing Ukraine with additional aid packages, including long-range ATACMS missiles and more advanced interceptors, but political debates in the U.S. Congress have slowed down approvals. European nations, too, are feeling fatigue after nearly 3 years of conflict. Some analysts fear that Russia is exploiting this moment of hesitation. Back in Ukraine, however, morale remains surprisingly resilient. Despite destruction and loss, communities continue to rebuild. Volunteers distribute food, medics work tirelessly, and power engineers repair damage under constant threat. Each night of bombing is followed by another day of defiance. As dawn broke over Kyiv this morning, smoke still hung in the air. Emergency crews cleared debris from roads and people emerged cautiously from shelters. Children carried backpacks to school, even if the classrooms had no electricity. The resilience of ordinary Ukrainians has become one of the defining stories of this war, a silent act of resistance against overwhelming odds. International observers say that this latest escalation could significantly reshape the next phase of the conflict. If the strikes continue, Ukraine might be forced to divert resources away from offensive operations and focus instead on defending its infrastructure. That could give Russia breathing space to regroup and fortify its positions in the east and south. At the same time, there's growing concern that the conflict could spill beyond Ukraine's borders. Several of the missiles that crossed western Ukraine came dangerously close to NATO territory. Poland and Romania have both reported radar detections of unidentified aerial objects near their airspace. NATO's response remains cautious, but alert any miscalculation could lead to a far wider confrontation. For now, the world watches closely as the war enters yet another dangerous phase. Both sides are locked in a deadly cycle of attack and retaliation, with no clear end in sight. Diplomacy remains stagnant and peace talks appear distant. In Moscow, state media celebrates what it calls a successful demonstration of power. In Kyiv, sirens continue to wail, and across Europe, leaders debate how to respond, whether to push harder with sanctions and weapons, or to seek a negotiated pause before winter deepens the humanitarian crisis. One thing is certain, this night of fire has changed the course of the war yet again. It has reminded everyone that despite months of relative calm in some regions, the war is far from over. As analysts put it, when the bombs fall at Midnight, it's not just a military message, it's psychological warfare aimed at breaking the spirit of a nation. Yet Ukraine's spirit remains unbroken. Amid the rubble, hope persists. Communities rebuild. Soldiers return to the front lines. The message from Kyiv is clear: we will not surrender. As international attention once again focuses on Eastern Europe, this latest escalation serves as a grim reminder of what's at stake not just for Ukraine, but for global stability itself. Each missile launched, each drone that strikes a city, brings the world closer to a dangerous edge. Coming weeks will determine whether this was an isolated night of fury or the beginning of a new campaign. What's certain is that both Ukraine and its allies are preparing for a long, harsh winter, one where the battle will be fought not only on the front lines, but in the skies above. As the sun rises over Kyiv, smoke still curls from the ruins, and the air still carries the echo of explosions. The people pick up their lives once again, determined to endure, because for Ukraine, survival itself has become